Hi and welcome to Jessie James Beads. I hope you're having a beautiful day today. Are you feeling beachy? I'm feeling beachy. Let's have a look at today's coastal catch. We've got some beautiful cylinder beads, frosty white facets, beautiful oceanic blue facets, and we've got silver oots hearts. I've also got some faceted beads in a very beautiful translucent. We've got some snow crab claws and these fabulous sailor's toggles. Let's see what we can make with this selection today. Today we're going to make a two-way project. I'm going to show you how to create a beautiful spiral pendant like so, but I'm also going to show you how we can create that into an easy wear lariat necklace. So perfect for the beach because there are no clasps. You can simply slip that over your head. And I'll show you how to create both of those as a project today. We're going to be using one of these beautiful blue cylinder gemstone beads. I'm going to use the rounded side of that sailor's toggle clasp, a single large faceted frosty bead, and 8 or 9 of these very, very pretty small faceted white gemstone beads. We're going to begin with a length of 18 gauge wire. This is silver plated medium temper copper. And I'm just going to trim away the end to make sure that it's nice and cleanly flush cut. You should not need any more than 6 inches or so. I'm just going to warm that through slightly. This has been in cold storage, so it's a little bit tense. I'm going to begin by creating a slightly open spiral. So I'm going to start a little way from the end of my round pliers. Bring that wire all the way around to create the beginning of a circular form. I am going to ensure that that cut end touches the next section of wire as it passes around, and that's just so that it doesn't get caught on anything in wear. So we're going to create a spiral, and the slower you go with spirals, the neater they will be. Now it can be as large or as small as you like. What I would say is we're going to stop short of creating the whole spiral because it's much easier to add on our next piece of wire. I have some 26 gauge round wire, again silver plated copper, and what we're going to do with this approximately 12-inch length of wire is allow around about 3/4 of an inch to sit over the top of the heavier wire. And I'm going to begin by spiraling 5 times around this heavier wire to get a really good strong connection point. Now you can do that by hand as I am here now. When you get towards the end, you might get a little bit of poking in your fingers. So let's make sure that there's a smooth cut on the end there. And then we'll smooth the whole thing down so that it sits flush against our core wire. We're then going to tighten up that little spiral. I'm just twisting it in the light so you can see that there are some gaps between those turns of wire. You can compress them together with your fingernails, or you can use your pliers like so just to tighten that up. Once you've got a really neat spiral, twist it to whatever your preferred grip is. We're just going to bring that down to the beginning of the spiral section just here. So where you have the second pass of wire coming away from the end section, I'm going to find the end of the finer wire and add in the first of my frosty white faceted beads. So I'm not going to make you watch me find the hole in these beads over and over. What we're going to do is to bring that to sit on the outside of that spiral. Now what you can do to begin with is bring that to the easiest part of the spiral, which is just here. And because my finer wire is coming from underneath the heavier wire, I'm just going to pinch that bead into position, draw the wire over the top, and we're going to spiral 5 times now around the heavier wire. And at the moment it's a little bit springy. Again, this silver plated wire has been in cold storage. There go the beads. As always, that's 3 wraps so far. 4, and that takes us to 5 wraps. So once you have got your bead set really nicely on the outside of that spiral, what we're going to do is scoosh that around a little bit. Make sure that your binding isn't so tight that it catches too much. We're going to bring in the next bead now, and I'll just show you the 2, but the technique will remain the same throughout. So let's bring that next bead down against the outside of our heavier wire spiral. Finer gauge wire started underneath, so we're going to bring it through the bead, pass it over the top of that heavier wire, and again we're going to wrap 5 times around the heavier wire, and you can compress that little set of wraps every time you complete one. So one way you can do it is to scooch finger and thumbnails either side. Once you've got that set into position, just bring that around ever so slightly more. So I'm going to continue adding a bead, and each time I add a bead, I'm now at the position where I want that starting place to be. I'm just going to very, very gently bring that wire around in a circular formation just with my hands, and you can see how easy that is. Even with this slightly springy, slightly angry wire, it's still very easy to do so. Now you can cluster these gemstones very close together, or you can spread them out a little bit. I'm going to join you back in a second when I've added all of the beads that I want to add, and I'll show you the next stage. Once you've finished adding all of your chosen beads onto the spiral, make sure that they sit at the frequency that you desire. I've got these quite clustered together, and the beginning of the wire wrapping is approximately next to the end of the wire wrapping. I finished with 5 wraps around that heavier wire, and I'm just going to make sure that that cut end sits down smoothly against that core heavier wire. What we're going to do now is to grip across that section of wire above the end of the wrapping, and we're going to just make a right angle turn so that we can add on our next bead. It will be easier for you if you make sure that this section of wire is nice and straight. I'm going to slide down one of those beautiful blue cylinder beads and have it sit just at the top of my little spiral. So if you wanted to, you can play around with how open that spiral is. Just give that a little bit of manoeuvre and make it sit how I want it to appear. We're also going to add on one of those frosty faceted beads. You don't have to if you don't want to. I just like how it looks. You've kind of got a white to represent that gorgeous coral sand. You've got an azure blue in the middle, and then you've got some more frosty water on the other end. So to me, it represents the beach. It represents holidays, sunshine and happiness. Now, if you want to recreate this design, which is as a standalone pendant, you'll need to make the loop quite large so that you can pop your chosen threading material or chain through. What I'm going to do now, though, is make a reasonably small loop, because in a moment I'm going to connect it to one end of my chain. So let's go for a loop that comes away at 90 degrees to the spiral at the bottom of the pendant. Push that wire forwards. And if you were going to make a pendant, you would make this quite a large loop. Right now, I'm going to make it a reasonably small loop. Let's bring that wire all the way around. Got an extended amount of wire because I just grabbed some that was on my desk, far more than we actually needed. So if I make that into a reasonably small loop, and then I'm just going to chase that wire around the core. Now, you may have a preferred side with this wrapping technique. If you look at this side as we're seeing it right now, you barely see the wire that passes through those beads. If you flip it to the other side, you'll see that little section of wire coming away. Now, it's quite pretty. It kind of reminds me of an ammonite fossil. So you can choose whichever side you prefer. I'm going to go for this side today. So what I need to do is to make sure that the cut end of wire that I'm just creating this wrapped loop up at the top, let's squish that down, sits at the back. So let's flip that over to my chosen rear side of the design, trim that little section away, and then make sure that you smooth this last little bit down, always being respectful of those beautiful beads. So the reason I haven't wrapped directly into that gorgeous Oots silver heart chain is because we need a different size wire to go through. The 18 gauge is perfect for making a form that you need to be quite strong, but I'm going to use a piece of either 20 gauge or 19 gauge just to link the end of the chain to my pendant, or the end, in this case, of our lariat necklace. So what we're going to do is just check that it goes through the end of the chain. I have cut this length of chain to be 33 inches. The reason I've chosen that length is because I know end to end that will fit over my head and some beachy up hair. If you have very big hair, then you might need to consider a slightly longer length of chain. This is just the length of chain that I have chosen today. So what we're going to do is, you could actually add in another bead if you wanted to. So let me just see if I can find a bead. So I'm going to use another one of those frosty faceted beads, and what we will do is very, very simply a rosary link or a double wrapped loop. So I have a scrap of that either 19 or 20 gauge wire. I'm just going to put a right angle around about 1.5 inches from one end, pop a reasonably small round form over the top like so, and then we're just going to give that a tiny bit of a strengthen, making sure we don't crush down anywhere wires cross over. Open that up a little bit and pass it into the end of our form, like so. You can close that back up by hand, and then we're going to wrap around that core at least twice, but let's see how much wire we have available. So I'm going to leave that end sticking out for now, because what I will want to do is centralise that link. Let's just tighten those little rotations of wire up so that they're nice and neat. We're going to add in our bead, and then what we're going to do is to consider where we need to add everything together. So let's pop that out of the way for a second. We're going to go for another right angle bend. Use those round nose pliers to make a second wrapped loop on this small bar in the style of a rosary link. Try not to poke yourself in the finger with the sticky outy bit, and then we're going to add that on to the very end of the loop. Now your other option, if you prefer, is to use your flush cutters to trim off the small loop and then use a file to smooth it down, and then you can go directly into the last link here with that 18 gauge wire. So you have choices, but I've just made this ever so slightly longer by adding in another link. So let's close that wrapped loop up now. And the reason I left the sticky outy bit just here was so that I can get the same number of wraps on either end, because I'm never really quite sure how it's going to turn out. You could sit down with a set square and you could make it very precise if you wanted to, but that's not how I roll. So let's hold on to the loop at the other end, bring that over for one more turn, and I think we've entirely filled that gap now. So let's trim that end away. And then we'll trim the other end away and take a second to just smooth those ends down so that they sit flush against the core of our little rosary link. Give that a smush on the other end, another smush, again being respectful of our beads, taking care not to squish them. So that's how we've added to the chain. So the next thing we need to do is to ensure that we pass our loop end of that toggle onto the chain before we repeat that connection at the other end. So all I will do now is repeat the exact same thing with this rosary link and another one of those frosty white beautiful beads just between here, and then we'll have our lariat necklace all ready to go, full of beachy vibes. I hope that you've enjoyed the tutorial here today at Jessie James Beads. My name is Jem, and I'll leave a photograph of the completed project when I've just finished that last little bit.